I'm tired. I'm in pain. I'm at breaking point. But I refuse to sit here and stay quiet while this government attempts to strip us of our basic rights and dignity. When I sat before this committee in June...
Over 6 days of public hearings, Australians with a disability told Parliament what losing NDIS support would mean for their independence, their families and their everyday lives.
I can't leave the house, nor can I actually access the ability to have a shower. And that is a vital way that I need to exist and live my life as a disabled person. I would perish. I would cease to exist. And many participants are in the same position. And that extension towards...
Despite more than 4,000 submissions and calls for reforms to be paused, the government's overhaul of the scheme passed the Senate yesterday with support from the Coalition. By tightening access and reducing some supports, the changes are forecast to save almost $38 billion over the next 4 years. But advocates warn the cuts will leave people worse off and shift the costs onto families, hospitals and the states. I'm Ruby Jones and you're listening to 7am. Today, CEO of Women with Disabilities Australia Sophie Cusworth on what these reforms mean for people who rely on the NDIS and if the scheme can be made sustainable without leaving people behind. It's Wednesday, August 19. Sophie, after months of argument over these changes to the NDIS, the Senate actually began debating the bill on Monday. Tell me what happened in that debate.
So in the Senate on Monday, we saw that each Greens senator moved a motion that the Senate reject the bill and call for the government to withdraw it.
People can and will die if this bill goes through. This bill needs to be chucked in the bin.
A number of senators in particular noted something of great interest to us at Women with Disabilities Australia, which is the gendered impacts of the bill.
Women already carry a disproportionate care burden in this country. They're filling the gaps in aged care, and now they're going to be filling the gaps in NDIS. That is not cost-free.
We saw a number of independent senators move to reject the bill.
I don't think that this can be done safely. We heard that this will isolate people. People are already more isolated than the general population.
We saw Senator Ruston on behalf of the Coalition noting some concerns.
The Coalition has been working across the Parliament with the government, the Australian Greens and specifically Senator Steele-John and members of the crossbench to improve this bill.
And Senator Steele-John from the Greens moving substantive amendments to the Act.
We do not fit into tiny little boxes. And even though that annoys government politicians and bureaucrats, that is the reality.
So the government won the Coalition's support on this bill, but only on the condition that it scraps its so-called widow tax on investment properties in return. So it seems like at this point the bill is being used as a bargaining tool.
Which is something that the disability community is quite familiar with. We know, like many other marginalised communities, our lives are often used as bargaining tools. We saw some pretty awful media commentary about the NDIS, in the lead up to these proposed changes. I think we are often scapegoated, often used as a bargaining tool. And what we need to keep at the centre of this is that we're talking about people's real lives. This is 1 in 5 Australians is a person with disability. The majority of people with disability are not on the NDIS. Only around 12% of people with disability are NDIS participants. But this is something that affects all of us. We are part of every community. It is incredibly devastating to see our community talked about in these ways and used for political debate.
So when you look at this legislation now in its current form, what does it actually change for people with a disability?
So broadly, it makes changes to who can access the scheme and what kind of supports are available under the NDIS. It also gives the government really significant, broad sweeping powers to make future changes. So one of the things that we've seen is that the government is making a commitment to cut social and community participation support funding by 50% under this bill. But if you look at the actual text of the bill, you'll see that this bill gives the government the power, or any future government, to make a determination that would cut a whole range of support categories by up to 99%. This is just one example, but across the bill, there are examples of really broad powers, discretionary powers for this government and future governments in this bill. So, the really tangible change that we're seeing right now is these narrowing provisions around access and eligibility and supports, but we're also seeing these really immense powers.
Okay, well, tell me more about the concerns you have as a person who advocates for women and girls and gender diverse people with disabilities. What are your concerns with the effects of all of this?
We see that this bill will have a disproportionate impact on women, girls and gender diverse people. Firstly, for women who are participants of the scheme or who are seeking support through the scheme, facing reduced supports, facing additional barriers to accessing the NDIS and the disability support system. What supports they can get will ultimately shift more of that responsibility onto unpaid carers. We know that 70% of primary carers in Australia are women, and that around 40% of primary carers are people with disability themselves. So we think that that will be a really tangible impact for our community. In terms of the access changes, we know that women with disability are already facing barriers to accessing the scheme. So often assessment tools used to assess capacity, functional capacity or support needs are based on really male standard presentations of disability, and that they often perpetuate the kind of medical gender bias that we see in the health system. We think that there will also be really tangible impacts on women through the cuts and the changes to support. So cuts to social and community participation support we see will have a real impact on women's safety. So our concerns are not contained to any particular provision. They are throughout the bill and in relation to the sequencing of these reforms.
And so when this bill was first introduced, the Senate inquiry was given just over 4 weeks to examine it, and people with disabilities effectively had about a fortnight to make submissions. How difficult is it to get a submission together in that timeframe?
It's incredibly difficult. We were given 2 weeks to get across hundreds of pages of technical legal content. Ultimately, we did write a submission in about a week. We received over 70 endorsements on our submission. This was from organisations and leaders across disability, law, gender, safety, health. And I think this really reflected the deep concerns that were not just contained to our community. They were deep concerns spread across sectors and a real support for the disability community.
And so after the backlash, the inquiry was extended and there were ultimately 6 days of public hearings. What did those hearings reveal about the concerns that people had?
The hearings revealed profound concerns. I think something that was so incredibly powerful was watching the lived experience panels.
I am exactly who the NDIS was created to support. Without assistance, I cannot feed myself, shower myself, wash or brush my hair.
These were panels made up of people with disability, with lived experience of the NDIS. Maybe they had experienced already really significant cuts to their plans. They were experiencing gaps in their supports.
Reductions to my physio funding has caused a significant decline in my already weak muscles, which I had spent years trying to build up and will not be able to regain them again due to my condition. When we say NDIS cuts will kill us, this is what we mean. These changes will cause more people to die in pain due to preventable deaths.
We heard from people who had received medical evidence that maybe they required 40 hours of support per week, but the agency had made a decision to give them 5 hours of support per week. I guess my story of giving evidence to the inquiry has really stuck with me as well. I was in the United States attending a conference on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in a global context, we are so proud of the NDIS. The NDIS is a world-leading disability support system. And so in the day I was going and we were talking about this world-leading system of disability support that we have in Australia, and then at night I was giving evidence to this inquiry about a proposal to really gut the NDIS of its core philosophy.
Coming up, when support is cut from the NDIS, who ends up carrying the cost? And Sophie, underneath all of this debate and this legislation is this much bigger argument about the cost of the NDIS. The governments have been saying for years that its growth is not sustainable. Tell me, do you think the NDIS is too expensive?
I think it goes without saying that the NDIS has grown. It has a cost and it has a number of participants that was not consistent with the original modelling. It does cost more than those who created the scheme expected it to. Whether it costs too much is, I think, a different question. I think, budgets are about choices. We've heard that line throughout. Lots of debate around the scheme and the cuts to the scheme. Budgets are about choices. This is an investment in our social infrastructure. But we also need to think about need when we think about cost. Does the increased cost of the scheme reflect that there was significant unmet need, that there remains significant unmet need? I think that there are opportunities to reduce the cost of the scheme that do not mean that we are cutting people's essential supports.
And the government still says that people leaving the NDIS will have foundational supports to go to. So what are you hearing about what currently exists outside of the NDIS to help people?
These systems don't exist. They don't exist at scale. They don't exist in a nationally consistent way. We are being told that people will be removed from the scheme, but they will not be falling between the gaps. We understand that the 2023 NDIS review made recommendations for reform. They gave a recommendation for a sequence of these reforms, and they said, build supports outside the NDIS first before making changes to NDIS access, eligibility, planning and supports. That has not been what has happened here. This has been the reverse. We are seeing people removed from the scheme before those systems exist. We know that there is a commitment to a system called Thriving Kids for a very particular population of children with disability. We don't have any detail on what foundational supports will look like for adults who are removed from the scheme. And I understand that the department gave evidence throughout the inquiry based on some very preliminary modelling that perhaps 90,000 adults would be removed from the scheme within that timeframe. And currently the question is, to where? And we know that it will drive crisis within public systems. So we expect to see greater public health costs, greater costs on health systems, hospitals, crisis systems like the justice system, the child protection system. We have been saying throughout this entire process, this bill is framed as sustainability. It does not create sustainability. It creates crisis.
And the NDIS, it was established 13 years ago now. How does where we've ended up in 2026 compare to the promise of what it was when it was first legislated by Julia Gillard?
When the NDIS was first introduced, we knew that it needed to be transformative. In the words of former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, it was ambitious and it needed to be ambitious. And I am so concerned that we are losing sight of that ambition, that we are losing sight of the philosophy of the scheme, which is to provide disability supports that are reasonable and necessary, that enable a person with disability to live an ordinary life, to participate in the community, to go to work, to become a parent, to leave the home. These are not luxurious things. This is an ordinary life for a person with disability that anyone else might expect to be able to live. There's been a lot of discussion about returning the scheme to its original intent. And I think when people are talking about that in the context of cost savings, what they're often talking about is having a scheme that exists for people with permanent and significant disability. But it's such a narrow way to talk about the original intent of the scheme. We need to keep in mind the original intent of the scheme was to uphold the human rights of people with disability to live an ordinary life.
Sophie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Also in the news, up to 5 key Sydney Swans players are reportedly set to be punished by the AFL as a police investigation into an alleged sexual assault at the Players Melbourne Hotel continues. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that the players will be dealt with under a rule which prohibits conduct unbecoming or likely to prejudice the interests or reputation of the AFL. The punishment is a suspension of at least 2 games. And a court has heard that Alan Jones groomed a junior staffer at 2GB for a decade, resulting in the young man sending him explicit texts. Complainant C told the court that he was a driver for the radio shock jock when Jones allegedly touched his penis and kissed him. The former broadcaster has pleaded not guilty to 20 indecent assault charges and 2 counts of sexual touching. I'm Ruby Jones. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.